How's it going, everybody? Z-Bilbs here. Saw the new Matrix movie. Um, I'm gonna skip the formalities. This movie is very disappointing. I honestly, I'm not even gonna do my usual format of review for this one, because pretty much all I have to talk about for this is the story and the characters and whatnot. Everything else is just kind of like whatever. So I don't know if it's gonna be the format going forward where it's just gonna be kind of just me telling what I think and not doing the more structured format, but we'll see. I'll play it by ear, but I'm gonna do a non-spoiler section, followed by a spoiler section. I can't really do this review without talking about spoilers because most of my biggest issues with this movie involve spoilers. Um, so yeah, I will give a spoiler warning once I get into that section. But let's start off with the non-spoilers. Let's just go over some of the basic stuff. So the movie, the score is fine. Nothing incredibly special. Does its purpose. There's some good tracks here and there. The visuals, it looks all right, except for when it doesn't look all right. There's the crappy CGI from Matrix 2 and 3. It's definitely back with a vengeance here, where people just look so digitized when they're flying around and stuff. It's uh, very jarring, but I guess for the most part it's fine. Um, the story is not very good. The characters are not very good for the most part. Um, Not very rewatchable because of how frustratingly disappointing the characters and story is. And how good of a Matrix movie is it? That's a little bit harder of a question. How, like, the genre appeal. I think definitely some Matrix fans will enjoy this one. I'm not sure. An entertainment. I guess I was entertained, um, or whatever. But man. Well, that's pretty much all I can talk about. As far as non spoilers go, frankly, I would say if you really like The Matrix and you like, um, you know, uh, you're perfectly fine with kind of hollow references and just fan service for the sake of fan service. Pretty much, if you were a big fan of, The Rise of Skywalker and all the fan servicey stuff that they did in there, then, all power to you. You probably will enjoy this movie. I'd recommend for you to go and watch this movie. You'll probably get a kick out of it. Or who knows, maybe if you're not a Matrix fan whatsoever, even then, I feel like the plot is too confusing that I don't know if you'd like it that much. I don't know. If you like just kind of loud, actiony movies that are just, and you don't really care about the deeper details and whatnot, then maybe go see this movie. But for everybody else, I'd recommend either skipping it, or if you already have HBO Max, maybe watch it if you're curious. But it's going to be hard for me to recommend this to too many people, I suppose. But that's pretty much all I can talk about as far as non spoilers. I'm going to get into the spoiler section, which I have a lot to talk about. This might go on for a bit, so I'm going to put a spoiler warning right here. If you just want my final score and you want to stick with the non spoilers, then I also got a timestamp somewhere around here to skip to my final score at the end. But without further ado, let's get into spoilers. And before I get into spoilers, actually, I just like to say, as far as my knowledge and history with the Matrix franchise, I wouldn't say it's like my favorite franchise or anything. This isn't like a Star Wars or anything for me. But I've always really loved the Matrix movies. I watched the first one when I was a kid with my dad, and thought it was a really fun movie. I've seen it a couple times. The Matrix 2 and 3, I watched those a few years after the first one, and while I didn't love those, they definitely had their problems. They had too much CGI, the story got really convoluted, it wasn't quite as straightforward and punchy and fun as the first one. They were still good times nonetheless. They weren't fantastic movies, but they were enjoyable movies. This movie is nothing. It doesn't recapture the fun and magic that the original had, and it doesn't recapture just kind of the fun, unique style that the sequels had either. This movie just feels like a hollow, empty husk of a movie trying to be so desperately to be a good Matrix movie, and it just fails on every single level. Um, to start off, let's talk about the characters. And uh, to start with, you've got Keanu Reeves back as Neo. And this is probably the one thing that was good in this is, Keanu Reeves is great. Say what you will about his acting or whatnot, but he still feels like Neo in here. He still feels, fun and, it just feels like he used to, and it's fun to see. And the thing is, he really doesn't do much in this movie and whatnot. I'll get more onto that later, but like him, the other character that I enjoyed in this movie was Trinity. You got Carrie-Ann Moss back as Trinity, which is really fun to see both of them again. But already, first spoiler is that like they are not in the movie that much, in the sense that it's actually like them as their characters. At the beginning of the movie, it's revealed that they got pretty much digitally put back together with a bunch of nanobots, and then this new group of Sentinels put them back in this new Matrix for some reason, because apparently them being in the Matrix draws more power for the Sentinels, and then keeps people in the Matrix, which this story is so convoluted. I will get to that, but um, but pretty much, so they're like different people, or and they don't like wake up until like later on. Neo doesn't get out of the Matrix until like halfway through it. And Trinity, that's like the whole main drive of the story, is to just get Trinity out of the Matrix, pretty much, to help her escape from her past thing, which already is like, it's not a bad motivator, but as like a final sort of like conflict for the story, it was just, by the time the credits rolled, I was like, wait, that's it? Like, they just got Trinity out. Now what? It felt like there needed to be more, and it's clearly just sequel baiting. But yeah, so Carrie-Ann Moss, Keanu Reeves, they're as good as ever. Their characters feel good, but they're I'd say Neo was all right. He had enough screen time, but Trinity, like as Trinity, was just felt just so underutilized. But overall, those two characters, more than any of the other characters, were probably used the best out of all of them. Now we're getting into some of the crappier characters. This is where we get into some of the more fan servicey stuff. Now the plot itself feels fan servicey just by the fact that they brought back Neo and Trinity just for the sake of doing that. But actually, before I get into this characters, I have to talk about just the whole premise of this movie, because the whole the first third of this movie is Neo being back in the Matrix and him thinking he's Thomas Anderson, and that the whole Matrix trilogy was just a game that he coded up. But you find out quickly that this is just like the new Matrix trying to trick him in and keep him in the Matrix and whatnot. And that was it was an interesting setup, but it's a very meta setup too. They even mention Warner Bros. And oh, we're doing a new sequel. Like, nobody likes sequels. There's no way it can capture the magic of the original. And the people are like, oh, I never even liked the original. And it's like the first third of the movie is such a self-referential commentary on just movies in general, and the state of reboots and whatnot in society. And it was kind of cool, and I think it totally could have worked if it would have stuck the landing, and if it would have tried to actually break the trend of just usual cash grab reboots that come out a long time after the original. But unfortunately, because it fails to do that, which I will get into a little bit later, it ends up just becoming that whole first third of the movie ends up being super hypocritical, being like, oh man, reboots and whatnot, they're not very cool. And then it ends up being exactly what it criticizes. I don't know if it's even maybe it's even trying to criticize itself, but even so, like that's not funny. That's just stupid. But yeah, then so pretty much that being the setup for the story, it ends up leading into being like, oh, this is the new Matrix. So, everything is, back from like the way it was before. Like it pretty much undoes everything that happened at the end of Matrix Revolutions or in between. Like there's such a big time gap. So pretty much what I got from it, because the movie is really clunky as far as its story and pacing goes. I'll get to that a little bit later. So pretty much the story of this movie is that at the end of Matrix Revolutions, there's peace between the Sentinels and the humans and whatnot. And then, Neo and Trinity are dead and whatnot because, you saw them die. And then there's a war between two factions of Sentinels, and then a new faction of Sentinels wins and takes over, and then these people kill the Oracle and the Architect off screen, which, whatever, thanks for that. And then they make a new Matrix so that they can get even more power consumption. And then pretty much the new Architect, which is the new the main villain in this movie, he's called the Analyst, and his whole thing is about he rebuilds Neo and Trinity so that he can keep people in the Matrix and get even more power, and he can use their fear and desire to do that, which is like, it's an interesting commentary, but it just feels so hollow. I will get to the character of the Analyst later because it's just absolutely terrible, but just that setup is already just feels just so tacked on. It feels like, they brought back Neo and Trinity just for the sake of bringing them back. To be fair, I'd say if this movie could have, stuck the landing, I don't really have a problem with that setup of Neo and Trinity coming back. The problem is the extent of all of the things that they bring back. If it was just Neo and Trinity and they're like, yeah, we rebuilt them with nanobots and whatnot, like, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm happy to see those two back. But the extent of things that they bring back and they're just like, oh yeah, these are back now, yay. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and all of those end up cheapening the whole idea of bringing Neo and Trinity back too. It all feels cheap under like the weight of all of this fan servicey garbage that they tack on here. But speaking of fan servicey garbage, let's start with fan servicey garbage number one, and that is bringing back Morpheus. Now, they brought back Neo and Trinity as the original actors, Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Ann Moss. For Morpheus, I guess they couldn't get Lawrence Fishburne or something, so they had to make some sort of derived plot convenience where, Morpheus died off screen. They literally mentioned it in a couple throwaway lines about how there was a new rise to power of Sentinels, and Morpheus never lost hope, and then Neo's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and you're like, wait, did Morpheus die? And they're just gonna be like, oh yeah, they're not gonna tell the audience. I might have missed it, but they're like, okay, Morpheus died off screen, whatever. And now he lives as a program that Neo coded in his Matrix games, and the very opening of the thing is like a character going into Neo's games and getting his program out of the games and out of the Matrix, and now he exists as nanobots inside the real world and as a program inside the Matrix. And it's just like so contrived and so forced just to have this character of Morpheus. And we didn't need the character of Morpheus. You could have had a brand new character. If you're not going to have Lawrence Fishburne back as Morpheus, then just don't have him. They had no reason to have him, and their plot reason for having Morpheus back is that we needed Morpheus so that we could get Neo out of the Matrix and get his mind out of there. And then clearly, even in the plot, that doesn't really happen, or that so they could find Neo or something, and that doesn't happen too. Pretty much all Morpheus does is he tries to get Neo out, and he's like, no, I don't want to go out. and then they sort of just force him out through a mirror. And then he almost dies. They bring him to the void place and do some kung fu with Morpheus, and then oh, Neo's powers are back, but we needed Morpheus to be able to get him through there. And it's like, no, you didn't need Morpheus. You needed Morpheus because the movie said it needed Morpheus, not because it actually needed Morpheus. You could have done this with any other characters. You didn't even have to do the whole rehash kung fu thing from the original Matrix. Like, it's a nice callback, but it felt so forced and so tacked on. And just that example with the whole Morpheus thing, because that's really all his character does. Everything else, he just sort of goes back into the Matrix and then fights some people and really does nothing. His character serves no purpose besides what the movie says his character's purpose was. It feels like the complete opposite of, like, I just reviewed Spider-Man No Way Home, and you have spoilers for that one. 3, 2, 1. Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield are back, and that could have been just a fan servicey thing, but their characters actually served to build and grow Tom Holland's Peter Parker in a natural way, and all of these characters are serving the movie in a completely unnatural and tacked on way that just felt so hollow and empty. And Morpheus is the first example of that. And then it just keeps going and going. Example number 2, and probably actually, I'm gonna go the smaller ones, like other characters that they brought back. They've got Naomi back. She was the lady from Matrix 2 and 3, who is, I think, like Link, her like wife or something, or Dozer. I don't know. She was I don't honestly, I don't remember her character too much, but she was one of those people from Matrix 2 and 3 who's a big deal, and now she's like the elder chieftain of the new city of Io, which is just a new version of Zion. Um, and you can tell, I don't know if they got back that exact same actress or whatnot, but another like super jarring thing about her character is that they're trying to make her super old, but you can tell so clearly that she's a young actress, that they just put some makeup on to try to make her look old, because you can tell in her voice that she is not old in the slightest, and she gets a decent amount of screen time. So it just felt so weird every time she was on there. It wasn't like a huge deal, but it was really weird. And it was another thing of like, okay, that not a terrible choice to bring back that character, but if you are gonna bring her back, just get a new actress who's actually old, or I don't know, do a better job of seeming old or something. But that's one example. Another, they had, I don't even remember her name. Her name was something, that the little girl from like Matrix 3, who is in the train station, who, I don't know, Neo helped free or something or whatnot. Now she's back, and she's pretty much back to just dump some exposition and to tell them, oh, here's how you can go and do this thing at the end, pretty much to set up the final plan of the movie. And it's like, yeah, cool that she's back and whatnot, but I once again, it felt like another pointless thing to be like, oh, look at that, Matrix, isn't that cool? Um, it wasn't a big problem, but once again, it's just more fan service for the sake of fan service. And then the big, not the biggest one, the biggest small one that really irked me was the Merovingian is back, if that's how you say his name. And once again, he was back, and I was like, oh my gosh, the Merovingian. And all he does is just, they had an action sequence, and now he's just this old like hobo dude, and he was just like yelling at them in French. He's like, oh, you ruined my life, I spit on you. And like, that's really all he did. They just fought some guys and then went away, and it's like, why was the Merovingian here? No reason. He was there literally so they could be, oh, look at that, remember him, you like the Matrix, don't you? um it was so stupid. um but once again, like, those 3 examples, they're not offensive because they're so small, but they don't build the plot in any sort of meaningful way whatsoever. They're there just to be there, just to pointless fan service for the movie. But then the big one, the one that really irked me, was the return of Agent Smith. This felt like, people were mad at, Palpatine coming back in Star Wars 9, and that was pretty stupid, but at least they had, Ian McDermott reprise his role as Palpatine, and, he's as great as ever being Palpatine. At least you see Palpatine, played by the actor who plays Palpatine, being Palpatine in a Star Wars movie, and as stupid as a plot contrivance was to bring him back, at least he's back in his original form. In this, they bring back Agent Smith not only for zero reason in the plot, he serves no plot point, but he's not even played by Hugo Weaving, literally the only actor who could possibly play Agent Smith in my mind. You've got, I don't even know the actor, just some knockoff, off brand white dude yelling, Mr. Anderson! Like, it's so terrible. Like, I'm sorry to the actor, because it's like, he wasn't, like, he wasn't bad. He didn't act bad, but the whole time he just felt like an off-brand Agent Smith, and there was no reason for him to be there. Um, and even if this was Hugo Weaving, it would still be a Palpatine situation where there wouldn't be a reason for him to be there, but at least I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'm excited to see what he's gonna do in the future, because spoiler alert, he at the end of the movie, he just like YOLOs out and just disappears even before the final little action scene. He's just like, see you later. Um, and like, oh my gosh, he didn't need to be here. And it actually makes no narrative sense for him to be there. Tell me if it does in the comments, I guess. But like, I mean, it didn't make sense in the first place. Besides, I guess like you could have it like, oh, we needed energy for the new Matrix, so that's why we've got Neo and Trinity, so we can control the people and whatnot. Like, sure, whatever, you can have that. But why in God's name would you bring back Agent Smith, literally the very being that the machines worked with the humans and got a peace treaty with the humans with, so that they could destroy, because he was destroying the entire Matrix, which they needed for their energy source and whatnot. Um, and then they brought him back. I guess you could say, oh, this new race of Sentinels, they were just a bunch of morons, and they brought back Agent Smith on accident because the Analyst is stupid. But like, I don't buy it. I really don't buy it. And then you've got the other reason, like you could be like, oh, he was back here because I don't know, he was a part of Neo somehow when Agent Smith zapped him in there, and then he came into Neo's code via the nanobots and something. And already that's an incredibly contrived reason that the movie does not explain in the slightest. If it does, I missed it somehow. But it just makes no sense. Like, I guess that contrived reason could have worked, and I maybe would have accepted it if it was Hugo Weaving, but they're bringing back a knockoff, off-brand Agent Smith just to have Agent Smith in there and yell Mr. Anderson. And all he does in this movie is he fights Neo, and he almost kills him. Oh no, is Neo gonna die? Pointless. And then Neo has his powers of the One, which he had already used on Morpheus in the dojo a little bit earlier. They have a fight where he almost dies, and then he finally uses his powers of the One, and Agent Smith is gone. And then he shows up in the final conflict and kills the Analyst, which he doesn't even kill the Analyst. And he's like, oh, well, see ya, I'm out of here. I was just using someone's body, bye. Like, he does nothing of significance in this movie. He's played by the wrong actor. It makes no sense why he would be here from a narrative level. There is no way the machines would allow him to be in here. And I guess, like, the Analyst, he was like, what, Smith? So maybe he didn't know that he was supposed to be in here, but it just makes no sense. They really should have just let it be. He had a good enough a death at the end of Matrix Revolutions, and I think it just cheapens that whole experience by putting him in there. There's probably some sort of contrived plot reason why he was here, but I just don't buy it. That was one of the stupidest things in this movie. And definitely the biggest example for me of fan service gone wrong. But then, even besides the fan service on this movie really cheapening the experience, another really bad thing about this movie is the pacing. Um, Matrix movies have always been, a little bit weird in the pacing. The beginning of the Matrix was kind of slow, and then there's some action. It's always kind of had that kind of roller coaster pacing effect, but it's always been good enough because it always holds your attention. There's always something interesting happening going on, no matter how the movie is paced. But the pacing feels so unbelievably jarring in this movie that it actively made me bored and just uninterested in what was going on. Like, I would say the best part about this movie is pretty much like the opening third when he's in the Matrix and he doesn't know what's going on, because then you're like, "Ooh, what is going on here? This is interesting." Once that opening third is over and they're like, "Oh yeah, it was just the Matrix the whole time. We were just the machines were keeping you in there for, to the power and whatnot." After that, like that whole opening third is like fine. It's just kind of slow, and then then it's just like action scene, action scene, action scene to get him out, and it just feels like just noise, just like fast, 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 like action, 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 get him out of the Matrix and whatnot. And then he's out of the Matrix, and then we're slow, we're taking a trip over to Io, and we're getting exposition dumps and whatnot. And then, okay, now we're back into the Matrix, and we're fighting Agent Smith, and da 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 da. And now we've got to go and talk to Trinity, and then we slow down again. Now the analyst comes in, and he gives his villainous monologue, and I haven't talked about the Analyst yet. I just hold on for a sec. And then we're slow, 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 and then that's done, and we get out of there, and it's just constantly just like the movie cannot find a good balance between slow, like incredibly slow burn pacing. We're like, yeah, okay, okay, keep it going, and pacing so fast and hectic that you're not catching anything that's going on here. Like the final plan for this movie is just them like talking and talking, be like, oh, we're gonna do this and this and this and this and this, and you're like, wait, what? Wait, what now? What's going on? It feels like the slower parts in the movie could have been paced way faster, and the fast paced parts in the movie could have used a lot longer of time stretching this out. And it's just weird. And speaking of like the action, I was talking about the action in here. The action in this movie is not very good. It feels just cookie cutter at best. Obviously it's not going to match the heights of like the original Matrix and whatnot, because that was revolutionary. um but it just feels like all of the action that's done in here, it's like seen that, done that, been there before. Like all Neo really does, he does some kung fu moves, I guess. There's nothing interesting. He dodges a couple bullets at one part, and it's like, yep, seen that, done that. He and then the rest of the movie, all he really does is stop some bullets. I couldn't tell you how many times he's just like, oh, I'm stopping the bullets. Like, yeah, I've seen that 1.5 billion times. You stopping bullets. He does that like literally like 5 or 6 times in this movie, and it's like, yeah, cool. Not like the most interesting thing he does is he actually uses his force powers to like stop a rocket and then send it into another helicopter. Like, I was like, oh, that's a new thing that I don't think I've seen before. That's interesting. But like literally all of the action scenes in this movie is either like Neo stopping bullets and like whatever, doing a couple kung fu moves that isn't really interesting. I've seen way better choreography in the John Wick movies. Um, or it's just random swarm battles. Like, that's their idea of new fun action, is we're just gonna throw more on the screen. We're gonna throw this big swarm of I don't know, AI creatures that the analyst is using, and it's just gonna be, strength in numbers, and that's new and fun. And it felt like just visual noise. It was just stuff happening for the sake of happening, and I was like, okay, okay, that's a lot of stuff, but more doesn't always mean better. Um, and literally the final action scene of this entire movie is, for one, it's just this big bar fight and they're all just fighting, and the freaking Agent Smith is trying to kill the Analyst, which can't kill the Analyst anyways, and then they're all just fighting people in the bar, and it's like, yeah, whatever, don't care. And then the big sequence is just Neo and Trinity riding on a motorcycle away from freaking World War Z computer zombies, and people jumping from buildings and explosions happening. And it's like, yeah, I guess that's cool and whatever, but it just doesn't feel like Matrixy cool. It doesn't feel. I I mean, maybe it's just a curse of, like, Matrix having such high expectations, but it, even for just a crappy action movie, it just feels just boring, just hollow, just empty. And then the final thing is just them running away from them guys, getting up on top of the building, be like, oh, it's so beautiful, let's jump off the building and fly. But oh wow, Trinity flies now for some reason. I guess she's now the one, but Neo is still the one because he can stop bullets. Or are they both the one? Is she the two? Like, I don't know. The movie doesn't care. They're just like, oh yeah, wait for the sequel if you want to figure out. But then Neo does fly later, so they both can fly. And who cares? Whatever. You saw a bunch of creatures jumping from buildings. Whatever. Don't think about it. It's stupid. It's just not interesting. It's just, just visual stuff. It's like, oh yeah, look at that. That's cool. That's Matrix. No, that's, oh my gosh. Okay. Let's get to probably my biggest problem. I know I might have already said Smith might be my biggest problem, but another huge problem with this movie, I said he was going to be the first thing I talked about, but I've saved him for last, is the freaking Analyst. So the main villain of this movie is not Agent Smith, who shouldn't have even been in the movie. It's the Analyst. Now, in concept, I think that the Analyst could have definitely worked. He intrigued me when he was on there. So this is a character played by Neil Patrick Harris. He ends up being the main villain. He starts off as just the therapist for Neo, and then he ends up being a bigger deal. And I thought, like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like, he was actually, I thought, did a good job and was kind of an intriguing character while he was being the therapist. But then the second, once you get to the scene where he slows down time, and then he's like just monologuing to Neo, and he takes off his glasses and he's like, all right, the act's over. I'm not the therapist anymore. I'm really the bad guy. Like, I was just like, oh no, oh no. Like, I think it, for one, I think it could have been better just by recasting him. I think Neil Patrick Harris as the Analyst, as they wanted for the Analyst, horrible miscast of Neil Patrick Harris. And I love Neil Patrick Harris. Probably the biggest problem is that I love Neil Patrick Harris so much because I watched him as Barney in How I Met Your Mother, and maybe it's just a me thing, but after he took off his glasses and stopped being the therapist, I thought he worked as the therapist, and he became evil, mustache twirling bad guy. I just could not take him serious. All I saw was Barney from How I Met Your Mother doing one of his evil schemes, like evil joking schemes from How I Met Your Mother. They literally have a scene in this movie where he's sitting on a chair going like this, like, and there's literally a scene in How I Met Your Mother where he like spins around on a chair with a rabbit and he goes "Mwahaha, mwahaha," and it's like, I saw exactly that. It was so just goofy and stupid and just, oh, like, oh my gosh. I mean, he's not the worst villain in the world by any means, but I mean, even besides the fact that I thought he was miscast and he just felt so cartoonish and fake and just was a wrong casting choice by Neil Patrick Harris, is that he had no interesting motive or purpose whatsoever. Like, who is he? he's the new architect, and which could have been cool, but then it's like, oh, he's a hip, suave version of the architect. The architect was like low, monotone voice talking like that. Like that guy, even though he was kind of convoluted and weird in himself, at least he was like an interesting presence. This is like everybody feels like they're hip and cool in this movie, and that was definitely like the analyst trying to be like, oh yeah, I'm cool and evil at the same time. And literally like the first like evil thing he does is, like, as I said, he just monologues to Neo for like 3 minutes, and it was both. Not only was it a giant exposition dump, pretty much talking about how he got Neo and Trinity and rebuilt them for the new Matrix and whatnot, but it was also the whole cliche of a villain pretty much explaining his entire master plot. Like, it was that too. It was a double cliche all rolled into one, and that's really what his entire character was. It was just one giant cliche. And also, I already said he's like the new architect. He's like the new evil architect working for the Sentinels, which in itself is just another example of a new knockoff version of older characters for the sake of fan service, but not fan service because it's a new generation. And then he just, besides the fact that he's horribly miscast and all he does is like monologue and be like, oh yeah, he's gonna come back to the Matrix, and then like his entire master plan is just so horribly contrived and stupid. Um, but he's just a joke of a character. At least this Agent Smith, as dumb as he was, he had some, I don't know, physical presence in him. He had some level of intimidation. But besides the fact that freaking the analyst could stop time, which is cool, I guess, he was just so unthreatening, so just like with that classic mustache twirling villain, like, oh yeah, he's gonna come back and I'm gonna he does nothing interesting. Like, his big powerful threat was just the swarm, the World War Z zombies, which doesn't make him interesting at all. It just shows that there's, action stuff to action. it's it's stupid. And then, like, moving on into how the movie ends, I thought was just the biggest slap in the face, because up to this point watching this movie, I was like in denial for a long time, because there were parts that I enjoyed about this movie for sure. um and I thought if this movie could have stuck the landing and ended in a meaningful, satisfying way, that somehow made sense of all of this fan servicey stuff, then I could have forgiven it a little bit more for its faults. But it ended in such just a stupid, goofy way that is so unaware of how goofy and stupid it is. Literally after, you know, freaking Trinity does the Mary Poppins and lifts Neo away, they get out of the Matrix and they kiss and they're back together. Now they're back into the Matrix just like that because pacing is non-existent. And then they go and they meet the Analyst and they're still alive, and then Trinity chops his head off a couple times, and haha, funny, he's getting all screwed up, but he's not getting screwed up because he's code and whatnot. That's another thing. There's like, I know this is probably like PG-13. There's no blood, but like all the blood is just like CGI computer code. It really looked stupid. It just made it look like another just crappy PG-13 action movie. It just made it more cheap and weird. But that's a quick side tangent. But anyways, she's chopping his head off and be like, oh, you jerk, that's for bringing children into the equation and manipulating me, you jerk. And they're like, okay, fine, rebuild the Matrix if you want to, make rainbows. And they're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, we're gonna go rebuild the Matrix and make rainbows, see you later, loser. And then they fly off into the sunset and fly towards the camera in a crappy CGI mess, and the end. And I was like, wait, no, that can't be the end, because even though this movie is like 2.5 hours, which is incredibly long, it somehow feels too long and too short at the very same time. by the end of it, it was like, okay, that's 2.5 hours. That felt way overly long, like too long for a movie, especially this movie, which nothing that interesting happened. But at the same time, it felt like that final action scene, which ended up being the final action scene, was really just a final scene where they were gonna get Trinity out of the Matrix, the team back, and then go do like one final assault on, I don't know, Agent Smith or the Analyst and tie things up. But it made things feel just so empty and unresolved, like they were just clearly sequel baiting, that they're gonna have to go and rebuild the Matrix and have to fight new Smith in the sequels. That I was just like, oh my gosh, no, that can't be the end. It was like, I know Matrix movies, there have been some with like good endings, quote unquote, but this felt like the most like happy-go-lucky, undeserved, just unresolved ending out of all of them. Like, what happens to the other characters? Who cares? I don't know. It was stupid. And yeah, I haven't even talked about the other characters because they're so just boring. I guess one character, Bugs, she's all right. She does some interesting stuff and whatnot. But they have all these other like side characters. Like, oh, here's Bugs' crew. Here's like the new crew of the ship, like from the original Matrix, and they're like trying to make you care about them. Here's one character who's like, oh, I looked up to Trinity so much, so I'm doing this for her, I'm here because of her, like, oh, care about you. And it's like, no, I don't care about them because they build up their character practically nothing, and then the movie tries to make you care about them. Literally one of like the main conflicts of the final action scene, like the one thing is happening, the Neo and Trinity are riding on their motorcycle to run away, and whatever. And then this one lady who I don't remember her name, I don't remember any of the stupid side characters' names. She's trapped by a bunch of code zombies, and so they've got to rescue her and or her friend or brother or whatever. So all of the characters, Bugs jacks back in because we gotta save her, and Morpheus gets there, and oh no, time is running out, and they mow down all the zombies, and then they're kind of hurt, but they're fine. Literally, I don't think a single good guy character dies in this entire. I don't think even a single character dies in this entire movie because they're all just like code zombies that are dying anyways. Or I don't know, maybe if when they're killing all the police, that their people in their little fetus cages are dying, but I don't know. The movie doesn't care. Uh, I don't care. But it's just showing like they're trying to make you care at the end about these characters that they give you no time building up with or caring about them at all. It just feels so undeserved and so just pointless and boring. Oh my gosh, this movie really upset me. But that is kind of the gist for when it comes to Matrix Resurrections. Is it just feels like an undeserved cheap reboot that didn't need to exist, never justified its reason to exist, and ended up feeling just like a hollow shell of what the Matrix has been in the past. So I am giving The Matrix Resurrections a 4.6 out of 10. This is a mediocre movie. Now, it may seem like with all of the trash I just talked on it that I would give this a lower score, but at the end of the day, it was a competently made movie. Neo was an interesting enough character, and I was interested enough in the story where I would say I enjoyed myself to an extent, and I can see why people would enjoy this movie. I watched this with my dad, who's also a huge Matrix fan, and I could see he had a grin on his face the whole way through, and I'm really glad that he enjoyed it. I would never wish for someone not to enjoy this movie just because I didn't enjoy it. But I think he just enjoyed all of the the references and all the callbacks to the Matrix, and for me it just ended up ringing just hollow for all of the aforementioned reasons before. So I definitely think people can get some enjoyment out of this movie. As I said, it's a well enough made movie. It has an interesting enough story. I just think for me, by the end of it, it ended up just feeling just so forced and so undeserved, unnecessary, that it made it so I was like, yeah, this movie is just mediocre. It didn't need to exist. It's fun enough, but it's not good to any extent. Um, but yeah, that is my review for Matrix Resurrections. I think just another example of what not to do when it comes to resurrecting old properties. Yeah, even the name is like a joke because they resurrected so many characters undeservedly. But that's it for my review. It probably went on a little while, but I had a lot to say about it. This might not be the format for future reviews. It might be more structured, but I just had to do this in a more rant style because I just had so much to say and just couldn't structure it in the way I wanted to. But um, yeah, that's it. Probably some more videos coming in the future, but yeah, let me know what you thought or whatever. See ya.